Welcome to Understandable Insights, Information to Intelligence with Sue Gordon, a national security podcast that provides you an elemental understanding of the world as it is, not how you prefer it to be. I'm Eric, joined each week by the Honorable Sue Gordon, and together we'll break down the headlines shaping our world and ask how we should be thinking and acting as citizens and leaders across issues in intelligence, technology, and business. It's December 16th, 2025. Let's get to it. Hey, Sue, how are you?
I'm good. I don't think you can really tell, but I am more festive. Here, let me.
How do you? Christmas tree, Christmas lights in the fern.
Yeah. Christmas sweater. I think we've rallied to the moment. Hey, big last weekend for you, Army Navy. Any reflections on your mids?
Oh, it was awesome. The boys did great. It was a tough game, pretty sloppy. The ball's bouncing all over the field. Like a bad game that was always close and always competitive and kind of what you expect from Army Navy, always a slugfest. So super happy the mid snuck out with a win.
Yeah, I don't feel bad for Army. That would be impossible. I grew up too much in a Navy family. I mean, I thought Army blankets were ugly just because they were Army blankets. But I will say, Army's basically outperforming their resume the whole game.
Yeah.
And then it just was never going to be enough. You just had that feeling all throughout. But on the other hand, great young women and men who choose to serve their country, there aren't any losers in the game, except Army lost.
Yeah, super cool. You always see that where they're slugging it out and in each other's faces the whole game. And then at the end, they're arm over arm, singing each other's alma mater. But always prefer to sing second because that goes to the victor. Reminds us of Christmas songs this time of year. You have some favorite Christmas songs you want to shout out?
I do. Following on our Christmas movie theme, I love Christmas music. I was trying to decide what my number one would be. And I stumbled upon this in a playlist, and I remember that this might be my favorite, and that's Bare Naked Ladies' version of God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen with Sarah McLachlan. It's just I love an up-tempo song. It's a great song anyway, but it's a nice throwback to Canada, eh?
Sounds like the 90s at its best. I love it.
Hey, listen, check it out. You all will love it. My girl, Kelly Clarkson, love Underneath the Tree, love Mariah Carey, and All I Want for Christmas Is You. Kind of a random one from a random movie. Dolly Parton singing Hard Candy Christmas. What's random about it is it's from the movie Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, which is a really adorable musical. But check out Hard Candy Christmas. And again, Dolly Parton singing about kind of hard scrapple lives is just wonderful.
Yeah.
And then Silent Night is just one of my very favorite hymns, songs. It's so beautiful, and the version sung by Trish Yearwood and Reba McEntire and Kelly Clarkson is really pretty. And then, before I turn it over to you to correct me on any of these, honor the late Jim Gordon. It's not Dominic the Christmas Donkey, although he really loved that one, and it's not the Chipmunk song, although he really liked that one. There's this random, I think, awful song called The Cat Carol. Listen to it. It's by Maren Kendall. But that's in honor of you, Jim. Your memory lives on in really awful songs.
The Cat Carol is a special one. Be sure to follow it up immediately with a peppy version, maybe God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, to pick up the spirits, because the Cat Carol's a little dark there at the end for Christmas.
What did I miss?
I was just going to say, these are some deep pulls. Great job.
That's the way we roll. We are Understandable Insights, Sue and Eric, atypical. That's us.
Yeah. Now, for songs, I'm into kind of the ballads these days. Oh Holy Night is up there for me. Joy to the World. And when you get on a roll and start belting. O Tannenbaum, you may know as O Christmas Tree, is one of my favorites. And then, sorry to do this to you, but Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer is also quite popular.
It's great. No, Oh Holy Night is just soaring, right? It's just soaring. Yeah, good. I think if we took and did a shuffle of all our songs, that one might be at the top.
UI playlist?
Yeah, there we go. We'll start building one when we get time.
Yeah,
exactly.
All right. Well, then let's get to some headlines. The Department of Energy launched an AI Manhattan project, and President Trump followed with an executive order directing the Department of Justice to stop any state that gets in the way of federal AI leadership. Nvidia can sell China not the best H200s to keep the U.S. stack out front, but only with a 25% toll booth attached. Finally, we'll look down under. Australia's world's first social media ban for kids. What a shift to their super retirement system could mean here, and how some of our international retirement dollars may be landing in places that run directly against U.S. national security interests. Before we get into the Genesis mission, just want to say that our thoughts and prayers are with the families and the communities affected down at Bondi Beach in Australia, particularly as we're going to talk about some of the Australian topics today, thinking about the Senseless Terrorist Act over the weekend.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for bringing that up, Eric.
So we'll begin with the Genesis mission. President Trump on November 24th signed an executive order launching the Department of Energy to lead this Genesis mission, a national effort to use artificial intelligence and advanced computing to transform American science and innovation and strengthen the U.S. technological leadership. This initiative aims to double the productivity and impact of American science and engineering within a decade, with goals tied to energy dominance, faster scientific discovery, and national security. DOE plans to mobilize its 17 national laboratories with industry and academia to build an integrated discovery platform connecting supercomputers, AI systems, quantum, and advanced science instruments. It all sounds great. We're going to blend AI, national lab infrastructure, and long-term innovation strategy. Is this better than just sending our kids to STEM camp?
Yeah.
Maybe an enhancement. But Sue, is this an indication that someone in Washington, D.C. still has their head screwed on straight? Or what do you think about this release?
Yeah, I think it is strategically necessary and directionally correct. You and I talk a lot about what's the role of government. Big problems, long time horizons, and deep pockets. I think this is a great example. The national lab infrastructure has historically been one of our most profound strengths and has been struggling to find identity post kind of the artifacts of the Manhattan Project. Not that there's not nuclear issues to be dealt with at the labs, but I'm just saying that I think it is a stronger piece of our infrastructure, and this could provide a really useful focus. Plus, there are institutions that know how to pursue big projects. So, in general, I think this is good government. Some likely benefits: scientific productivity at scale, gives us strategic competitiveness. There are some public good spillovers. We've talked about why AI is something that really needs to be married up with national security interests writ large, in part because that community knows how to deal with risk and has demonstrated that. So I think that there are some real likely benefits out of this with which it is hard to argue. There are, I think, though, some core risks, and that is it really just integration theater where you have data and models exist, but they're not embedded into scientific workforces, right? It's the classic, let's put a lot of money into something to build capability that sounds really good, and then we're expecting some miracle event for it to come together to produce the outcome we want. I would love to believe that this could be the kind of gravitational pull to force us to have new governance models that are not so onerous as the ones that we have currently in the government, but I worry about that. And I worry if there's no clear authority to assure delivery. So that's another risk that has to be addressed. Talent mismatch between where the talent resides to pull this off and how you get it put on task. And then finally, it will really test us to have enough security concerns to make sure that AI is responsibly done in a manner that is very Western rather than the way China might approach this, that you don't have security overreach where it's just so you must prove everything first that you just simply don't move out. So I think good strengths, some core risks. What do you think?
I think it sounds like a great idea. And at the risk of sounding overly cynical, I was like, wait, did this come from the same administration that we've been talking about? This sounds like exactly what you have the national labs to do. And
Right.
great that they're geographically dispersed from Idaho to New Mexico and throughout the country. It seems like a really great idea. One of my additional concerns, okay, we're just going to slap down and say we're going to double this. What
Yeah.
exactly are we doubling here? How are we doubling science? And I think in DOE, we'll get into more of the weeds of how we're going to actually quantify these metrics. We certainly need improvement, and this sounds like it's a great way to enhance our infrastructure across these areas. But just saying we're going to double something double from what?
Yeah, and I think I have too much scar tissue from new initiatives, more money, and then everyone takes their existing programs and they recode them against those initiatives without actually
Yeah.
developing new
Yeah.
initiatives. So I worry about that. There are a couple things that we might watch for, or if someone's listening to us, they could put it in. I think what's missing that would be good signs that this is going to be the positive version of what we hope for is one, you need some non-negotiable national outcomes. What are you trying to do? What is AI going to deliver? So set up something, whether it is in the area of machines or pharmaceuticals or something, pieces of electricity infrastructure that you're going to reduce the materials qualification timelines by 50%, right? Very reasonable things for AI to deliver. So I think some non-negotiable national outcomes. Back to the mission owner with authority. One, I think energy is one of our most profound critical infrastructure needs for all the reasons that we've said over previous podcasts. You would have to give the authority to the Department of Energy, and then you'd have to create a Department of Energy that was able to pull it off. And so how do you put the talent in there? And then the last thing I'll just say is we talk about it all the time, but we have not yet demonstrated our ability to put together a public-private partnership that delivers on the value proposition for both partners, right? Sometimes we talk about from a governmental perspective of a public-private partnership, which is the private sector is going to do what the government wants without accounting for what the private sector needs. So those are the three things, and then human capital investment. But I like it. I think it's a great, I hate to say a Manhattan Project, but I think AI is worthy of that kind of singular focus moniker. You just have to do it differently than you did the Manhattan Project.
Yeah. Interesting with the leadership piece, right? Because a lot of this AI stuff is falling under commerce right now, and especially with what are we going to be able to sell to other countries, and we'll talk about the Nvidia H200s here in a little bit. Also, particularly with the leadership at the top of DOE right now, is very particular in terms of what energy is good, what is bad, solar's woke. So I have a hesitation there as well, but I'm optimistic that this can be a good venture. Can you talk a little bit about the public-private partnership? Because these labs, they're federally owned, right? They work with universities. So how does that kind of partnership and structure work, and how is that our advantage?
I think the thing that you're going to have to solve is the impedance mismatch between the speed at which things can be advanced in the private sector and the surety with which things can be advanced with government investment. And again, we haven't yet demonstrated what I think is a modern version of saying, I want the private sector to participate, but I'm going to allow them to be successful in a private perspective. And one of the ways
Hmm.
to think about it is when we formed InQtel back in, ancient history, 98, the revelation that allowed, I think, InQtel to be a successful venture partner, taking governmental imperatives, but building off the strength of the private sector was a big change. As you said, we weren't going to own the intellectual property. And so what is the modern version of if you want the private sector to come in, you can't say you're not going to make a gazillion dollars if you participate. You can't give away all their initiative of being a good business. So to me, that's where you need to bring the two, security and speed, together, but you won't do it if you're making the value prop being only one side or the other.
Well, that's on the build side. The other part of this is the regulation side. Last week, the White House issued the AI policy framework aimed at stopping this patchwork of state by state AI laws from shaping the national playing field. It calls for minimally burdensome national AI framework and argues that fragmented state regulation can slow innovation and complicate compliance. Creates an AI litigation task force at the Department of Justice, whose sole job is to challenge state AI laws deemed inconsistent with the order's policy and directives. Commerce to publish an evaluation identifying onerous state AI laws within 90 days. And it also ties federal leverage to compliance. So directing limits on certain BEAD broadband funds and encouraging agencies to condition discretionary grants. So BEAD is a broadband equity access and deployment program. Back in 2021, there was a $42.45 billion federal grant that was run by Commerce, infrastructure to help get high-speed internet to unserved and underserved areas by funding that last mile of broadband. and then each state runs its own competitive process to award grants for those internet providers. This EO also enforces some compliance through some other FCC and FTC actions and a legislative proposal aimed to preempt conflicting. So essentially withholding monies to the states if they aren't compliant with
Right.
this EO and with national AI regulation. What do you think, Sue?
Yeah, I think the Trump administration is right that America can't afford fragmented AI governance. I think the BEAD program is a good example of how the government has tried to manage those two things of federal government doing what it can do, kind of standard settings and values centric, but then releasing the money for implementation. And that's, in my head, that's the way you think of it, right? That's even a way to think about foreign policy is shared values, good framework for governance, but allowing for difference in implementation that keeps the competitive pieces going. Again, this is 2 in a row that I think the administration got right. This idea that fragmentation is dangerous, that speed certainly matters. We are actually in a strategic competition with China, and we could talk more about that. And China has some natural advantages in speed. I think we have natural advantages in innovation and long-term success, but speed is mattering right now.
Mhm.
And so if you let just everyone do their own thing, I'm not sure you're going to get to the outcome you want. And maybe AI is just one of those, critical technologies where frontier AI belongs at the federal level, just to kind of set that standard. Interesting, we're talking about it now governmentally. It's a conversation you and I have had about why I don't think market forces alone, leaving frontier AI to the private sector, I don't think is a good thing
Right.
or sufficient thing. There's some areas where this approach is, I hate to say wrong, it's risky. If you preempt without allowing some sort of substitution, in other words, if the only power is to stop a state from doing something without establishing enforceable rules that leave some accountability and pathway to resolution, what you're going to have is you're just going to have a different kind of jumble of things that aren't getting you there. I'm not sure that voluntary standards are sufficient, but I'm not sure that imposing one point of view, as you and I have talked about the cultural issues that are embedded in AI or point of view or political issues that have to be managed. You're going to laugh when I say this next sentence. I think it's possible that national security is being over-invoked.
Ha!
I know, but I think it's possible. We talk a lot about concerns that are important to the nation, but too often, especially this administration, invokes national security as some reason to be prescriptive or prohibitive or punitive. I can't believe I came up with 3 Ps just off the top of my head. And so, yes, it is a national interest, but to put it in the national security bin, I'm not sure is going to be effective. It's the same thing as we were talking about Genesis AI. I think there's a real good reason that you want energy or commerce to be involved in this rather than the more comfy Department of Defense where we're really
Mhm.
sure about national security. Yes, but they tend to be more narrow than I think this moment allows. If we want to talk about what looks maybe better than this is some kind of tiered authority or clear liability rules. Maybe there's a federal floor, not a federal ceiling. Those are the kind of things that would make it work. But I don't think they're wrong to say that this is a technology for which unfettered fragmentation is going to serve us.
You don't want to slow down innovation,
Right.
right? I think this is still showing that regulation, the federal government is involved. It's not just completely handing it over to the private sector, like you said. And I like that it's early, right? I don't think that this DOJ task force is going to have a ton to do right now because I don't think a whole lot of states have
Right.
had AI law that conflicts with AI policy or anything. On the other hand, you can look at it and say, well, this looks like some of the other things the administration's been doing in terms of targeting different groups and going after certain states and weaponizing the Department of Justice, so to speak. But I think that this more says, hey, no, we're serious about this. We're keeping it at the federal level. Let's not have a patchwork of laws that AI companies comply with 50 different regulations because that's going to slow us down in this AI race. So I'm drinking the Kool-Aid.
I've mocked this administration for what I deem is it saying it's transparent, and I see no fiscal transparency or transparency on Venezuelan boats or other things. But
Yeah.
the things we've talked about today, This is actually how you build transparency. You put these things out there rather than just putting your thumb on the scale and say, we're going to go to company X to deliver capability Y, and that's it. So I kind of put this in the bin of what technology transparency looks like. And remember, we are still trying to overcome as a nation a world in which critical technologies were those which we developed inside of the government. And we knew how to control those and to govern those things and to make sure that we were getting to the place we wanted to be as a nation. I think you have to put this kind of intention out there in order for the discussion to issue forth about how we're going to do it differently. Again, maybe I'm just in an optimistic mood of the season, but I don't mind this, even if I think there are some areas that are fraught with peril. And again, if you decided you were going to be punitive, you could do real damage with this.
Positivity episode.
Yeah, there
Like
we
it.
go.
Yeah, well, that's this next story about
Yeah.
Nvidia being poised to regain access to China market for the H200. The Trump administration signaled it will allow exports under Commerce Department oversight, but there's a 25% surcharge and fee attached to those sales. The permission is framed as a compromise. The U.S. keeps tighter restrictions on Nvidia's newer, more powerful Blackwell chips, while letting China buy a prior generation part that's still highly capable and in high demand. This continues to be the playbook. Don't force China to go fully indigenous and innovate faster than necessary. If you can sell them a powerful but not cutting-edge chip under tight oversight, you keep Chinese AI developers building on U.S. hardware stack, you preserve some leverage and visibility, and you reserve the very top-end capability for the U.S. and close allies. But H200 is still a very capable compute. Even if it's not best, you're still increasing China's advanced AI capability. While we may gain leverage, China gains time, scale, and learning effects. Plus, there's always diversion and enforcement risk. We talked about the NASCAR analogy before, where one company builds most of the motors, but you decide that you're going to be able to win based on other car designs and your operators. So do you still like these sales?
Yeah, I think you can't long for a simpler time. You've heard me say this before. Every technology is available to everyone. It's the one that puts it to use faster. Capability development is getting closer and closer. There are lots of good reasons for U.S. leadership, and so you can't pretend that we can affect that leadership without participating globally. I don't care how isolationist you want to be. That just isn't going to work. So whether I like it or not, whether I see risk to it or not, I just don't think you have a different approach. So now how do you do it in a way that minimizes your risk? So lots of good things about it. We've talked about it on various other technologies, whether it's the leadership or you're preventing some of the market substitution where you allow foreign investment and then they scoop that technology away and take it away from the U.S. And it gives us some chance to maintain visibility in terms of what the capabilities are. So those are the good things, and we cite them over and over. I think you and I are on the non-isolationist side. That said, you have to be clear-eyed about how you're putting this into play. There is no doubt that when you sell these things, you are improving the capabilities of our adversaries and competitors. China's a great example. They're going to be able to train their models better. They're going to optimize it, and they're going to get system integration expertise. I also think there have been a lot of conversations about this within the government as it's not the technology that you worry about, it's the end use. But I gotta tell you, monitoring end use is a very complex, very sporty thing to do. How do you ensure that things aren't being reconfigured or being used in the way? So, and I also think that selling to China is a mixed signal to our allies and partners who we put lots of pressure on to not sell to the exact same people we're now saying we're going to sell. So I don't think those are equivalent mitigators that say you don't do it, but I think there are certainly things that you have to attend to. And then there are just some, I think, kind of some ugly sides to this that just have to do with the slowness of our own system and how focused some of our adversaries are and how quickly they can take, in some cases, they can take technology that we've developed and put it into their use faster than we can put it into our use. And so when you do this, I think you're running that risk. But again, I don't think there's a different choice to be made. And then maybe come up with some additional things like time-bounded licenses or aggregation limits, or if you want to go to use, you got to telemeter the systems that you put our technology into. I think those are hard to enforce, but
Hmm.
maybe it's worth the effort to try and put some of those governors on that are not prohibition governors, but actually how you can aggregate them into some greater capability.
Yeah.
And keep on having friends. Like, really tackle this issue of, I think if you are some of our friends globally,
Yeah.
you're saying, wait a minute, they're getting a better deal with our strategic partner than we are. And so I think you really have to keep investing in allies and partners if you're going to do this selling to those people who would be perceived as adversaries and competitors.
Yep. You got to have a good relationship with Nvidia to understand what exactly is going out, and a lot of responsibility on the Commerce Department, right? Check that in state that you're talking about to figure out what exactly they're doing with it. Are they more advanced? Is China moving ahead in this race by us giving them the 200s? Should we sell them the H201 or the H202 in subsequent iterations? So a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, Eric, you pulled out my soapbox. Now I'm going to have to stand on it.
You're welcome.
You just mentioned one of the reasons why we need our best and brightest to want to come and work as part of the professional cadre in the government. Suggesting that that is not worthy of our best talent, or worse, is somehow malfeasant and populated by people who are trying to make a buck on somehow the public's time. The effect of that is you have less capable institutions at exactly the moment that even this administration is saying we need great government. And not only do we need great government, we need revolutionary government. We need to reimagine how we affect federal government. And so, come on, guys, get all your signals together. And one of them is, it's the thing I've said for years, which is the best first 5 years of any student's work life would be spent in the national security sector that now includes energy, commerce, and so many things. So I think if the administration wants to signal that this is where we're going, that we're going to beef up, you have to have a concurrent effort to say, and we think this is a place that the best talent should want to come, as it always has, by the way.
Do you want to talk any more about 5G and how we kind of missed the opportunity on 5G and how we could win 6G, even though it lets you video scan through your skin?
The message on 5G is a lot what we're talking about here. What you had was a critical technology in 5G and critical to the kinds of national interests of how we develop our infrastructure, how we move information, how we provide resilience. And we left it to the private sector to decide how they were going to invest their dollars in that technology. And one of the decisions that the private sector made, which doesn't seem on its surface unreasonable, is we want to offshore the foundational things that tend not to be high profit, and we want to keep the high profit things for ourselves. And what happened was we basically gave away technology, and we are really struggling to get it back. And it's not just a security issue, but it is an economic issue as well. So we better get on with 6G because we lost the 5G piece for both the sales globally, because you had China come in with a really good technology. Don't argue with me about whether it's the best. It was certainly good enough, especially at the price point they were able to
Yeah.
offer. And the West basically pulled back from that and didn't have a functioning competitor, including within the United States. You know, that BEAD program that you talk about, if you want to talk about localities making decisions about how they add broadband so that they can effect what they need to locally, they were buying Huawei because it was performant and affordable.
Yep.
So the 5G, 6G example is really this issue of what are in our national interests. How do we need to engage the private sector to first understand that national interest in case they were missing that point? And then how do we allow them to participate that it doesn't keep them on some island that is never going to allow them to penetrate the market that is going to transport the technology forward? So I think it's a great example. But these things that we've just talked about could be transportation for us, but you have to affect them in a different way than we typically prefer.
Maybe that 25% toll booth and excise will be added bonuses for recruiting talent to the federal cadre. Who knows?
Yep, yep.
Probably not.
Maybe not, but even in your glibness, that's the kind of thing that has to be considered. It doesn't work if you don't have a whole ecosystem of policies and reinforcing investments to make an outcome happen. You can make yourself really feel awfully good with a couple $1 billion of foreign investment in something that you think is important given to a company that can perform, but without the ecosystem around it in order to turn into national advantage, you won't have done much good.
Yeah, just trying to balance out your positivity.
You did it. Now I'm depressed. Let's go on to something else.
Well, let's talk about world's first child social media ban. So it's Australia's under-16 social media restriction began last week, forcing major platforms to remove existing under-16 accounts and block new signups in Australia, or they risk fines up to 49.5 million Australian dollars. Proponents say this will reduce harm to children's mental health and well-being in still developing brains, anxiety, self-harm content, doom scrolling. And Prime Minister Albanese, his analogy is to the drinking age. He wrote that Australia sets the legal drinking age at 18 because our society recognizes the benefits to the individual and the community of such an approach. Critics, however, cite free speech, and some also argue beyond the addiction harm debate, social media is where many kids, especially those with niche interests or marginalized identities, including LGBTQ+ youth, find community, belonging, and support they may not have locally. I'd like to welcome the Commonwealth of Australia to this previously instituted policy in my own household. We've talked before about how security is about systems, trust, information, resilience, and we've described the information environment as a domain where social media data could be used for influence advantage against free societies. Sue, what do you think about this ban, and do you think it's something we should consider adopting nationally here in the United States?
So I like the ban. I like the action against something that we know is a problem. I actually like the taking on of sacrosanct belief in terms of freedom of speech, because that has been used in other varieties that have been used to keep us from getting to the future we need to get to. And I don't think when you need to do something different, you can carry with you all the things you've always done. So information quality or lack of quality when perpetrated on a bunch of developing minds is a problem. We know it is. And I admire Australia for tackling this, much as they tackled guns in 1996. And that flew in the face of personal freedoms too. But you're just deciding where the greater risk is and not allowing yourself to not tackle an issue just because you have to make a choice about where the greater risk lies. And I think what Australia has said, the greater risk lies in an unconstrained social media environment that are causing harm to our children. I hope what happens is that you see some really cool advances that tackle the problem that you suggest, which is how do you still form communities, whether for isolated communities geographically or isolated in terms of culture or isolated in terms of just how outgoing you are. There's some version of a public square, there's some version of a library that can provide that. I hope that what comes from this is new means for people to connect while still putting some constraints on, because the downsides are really obvious. We all know them, whether we want to address them or not. And I think Australia has been a leader in this before. And I like that they're being a leader again.
Yeah, I like Albanese analog a lot about the alcohol.
Listen, I think there are clever solutions, and I'm just on the record on saying that there is an element of willful subordination of personal interests in order to create the kind of society we want. One of the things that we lost when the world became digital, when everything came exactly to our doorsteps, and I didn't have to go through middle men and women in order to get something, is we started thinking that I could have whatever I wanted without thinking about the deleterious effect of that kind of defeat of the tragedy of the commons. And so I admire it, and they'll figure it out.
Hmm.
Listen, they're actually in the aftermath of Bondi Beach. Australia has very quickly turned to saying, where did we not do enough in terms of gun laws? So these are not things that you can ever get right and hold
Hmm.
forever. You have to keep looking at the outcome. I feel like a broken record on outcome, but it really is outcome that matters.
Yeah.
So I admire it. I think it's a good play, and I think people who suggest that it is against free speech, I think there's an absolutism.
Well, one of the other things we're looking at Australia for and being a leader in is their retirement system. President Trump saying he's looking very seriously at Australia's compulsory superannuation retirement system. They just call it super. It's basically a mandatory employer-funded retirement account layered alongside a separate public pension. And today, the required employer rate is 12% of ordinary time earnings. Workers can also top it up voluntarily, either before tax or after tax. But the compulsory part is the employer driven, and the money is invested in a super fund until retirement access rules kick in. The before tax general cap as of 2024 was $30,000 a year, and then after tax top offs can go up to $120,000 per year. But critics argue this will squeeze workers and result in lower take home pay. 12% sounds like a lot, but that's the policy choice. Originally, Australia started at 3%, and they elevated since the 90s. And in the US, employers already pay a meaningful retirement health payroll that's 7.65%. So 6.2% comes from Social Security contribution, and 1.45% comes from Medicare contribution. Economists generally expect the cost of employer mandates to be shared with workers over time via wages. But the question is where it goes and whether workers will see it and own it. Importing the super risks expanding government influence over the capital markets as well. So, Sue, what do you think about this part of Australia's system?
We know in the US that there's goodness to this approach. What we've tried to do is to use our Social Security that is something that people can count on, and we have recognized that as structured, it is either insufficient or likely to go away, and so
Yeah.
you've seen the rise of the 401(k)s and thrift saving plans and all sorts of benefits. The problem is that latter approach of 401(k)s is too voluntary, too fragmented, not guaranteed, not universally put into play. And so is it really providing enough of the financial resilience that leads to a nation that's thriving in its population, not just in its GDP? So I think we've known that what we have with Social Security isn't enough. That's what we did when we started adding on 401(k)s. I think we now see that that just isn't enough.
Hmm.
So here's my idea. I think Social Security is a good floor. And for all the reasons you say, I think it would be hard to instantaneously say, okay, today we're going to go to something like Australia's super because the contribution on business owners is just so profound.
Yeah.
And then if you're not going to have them cover it all, then you're going to have workers saying, whoa, 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 whoa. Let me make a decision about how much money I'm saving, because that's what this is. So I think you could phase it in. There are a lot of good things about it. You even see this administration kind of talking about it when you talk about savings accounts. It's not quite as organized. There's not quite as much of, the employee individual control over that. That's more of a governmentally centric program.
Hmm.
I tend to like ones where the government sets the framework, but market forces are allowed to come into play. So I'm going to give this another thumbs up, even though Australia's implementation is likely not going to be able to work for us in one step. If we made it incremental in a weird sort of way, almost like Australia did, I think it could help. I think you would need professional governance. You're going to have an anchor by Social Security, but not the same program. And then I'm just going to go to the last point you made, which is you're almost starting to see it as a large pool of capital that could be used as an instrument of national and foreign policy. Sovereign wealth funding, as you and I have talked about. The question there would be, how do you protect it so that it's not put at tremendous risk? And do we have the mechanisms to do that? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's certainly worth exploring. I don't believe Social Security will be there for me. I'm not planning for it to be. we have to do something and plan to phase it out. Additionally, if you look at our budget and how much money we're spending, that is a huge bulk of it is the contribution of Social
Yep.
Security and Medicare implementation. So by being able to phase some of that out and put the burden on the employers, which, the burden already exists, it's already at 7%, you're just shifting that around. And folks say that that'll affect wages. Sure, that'll get adjusted over time, but that'll get baked in just like Social Security and Medicare is. I think that to the point of regulation, who's managing the money, if I have a choice, being able to put that in a Vanguard or an SPY, that's my choice versus, it just goes in the government. And then
Right.
how much authority do I have as I want to adjust
Right.
my risk tolerance, right? When I'm
Right.
30 years old, I want to be very aggressive because I got the long time horizon. But as I'm getting older, I'm planning for retirement. Am I able to adjust that on a risk adjusted basis better? You should be able to do that. These are just areas that we could foul it up. And then my other question for you is, does this scale? Australia has about 30 million people, right? It's an order of magnitude larger population in the United States compared to Australia. And how does that scale?
Where the scaling breaks down is what you just said. Yes, Eric Kep, you absolutely should be able to manage your risk and make choices for you. But when you have a massive population, and if one of the things that it does provide is economic resilience of your entire population, if you're going to give them all the flexibility that you just articulated, doesn't work at 350 million people in the same way it does. So I think you're going to have some tempering that way. But again, I don't think you could just lift and shift Australia's program, but we have got to do something about the economic resilience of our population and the disparities between folks. And, Social Security was a really wonderful idea. It isn't doing what it was expected. It's not sustainable within the budget, and it might deliver some income, but it isn't a sustainable income. It's a good time in a lot of different domains for us to reimagine what government looks like, what private responsibility looks like, and what personal responsibility looks like, and then come up with some balance there that works with the high-minded ideals of making sure that we can take care of all the people that we have while still allowing the underlying fundamentals of a free market system. And so that means we need people who can create. And to me, that's what the most frustrating thing about these times is we have to embrace that we can't just keep evolving the systems. We have to reimagine, and who are those people that believe it's their responsibility to do more than act for themselves. But I believe in us. We just have to see it. And in that regard, Australia is a great model, right? They're one of our closest partners. They're a free and open society. Yes, maybe they're smaller, but what are the principles that allow them to design a system themselves? And let's take on some of those principles and just make them work for us.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not perfect down there either. Certainly worth exploring. I think a lot of optimism to be had there, but you also got to worry about where the money goes. This next story from the New York Times op-ed argues that even boring retirement accounts, especially big government ones, can end up financing activities that run straight against U.S. foreign policy and national security goals. So this gentleman, Jonathan Hellman, describes trying to figure out where the holding of his federal government's thrift saving plan, or TSP you mentioned before, went, especially in the International Index Fund, the I fund of the TSP. He found that the fund discloses only its top holdings, so leaving thousands of other positions opaque. He filed a Freedom of Information request to see what was inside, and he said the data he obtained showed retirement savings from government employees and military members can indirectly support China's techno-industrial ambitions, not necessarily by investing in China, but by investing in firms elsewhere that partner with Chinese entities the U.S. has sanctioned or blacklisted. He had a couple examples. In Bangkok, American savings are supporting Bumrungrad International Hospital, which last year strengthened its partnership with the Chinese genomics giant BGI. And then on Singapore's main stock exchange, China's largest privately owned shipbuilding company, Yangzheng Shipbuilding Holdings, which produce ships that could be mobilized to support Chinese military operations, as having investment. We tried to stop a little bit of this back in 2019. Senator Rubio and Senator Shaheen introduced the Taxpayers and Savers Protection, TSP Act, aimed at preventing TSP from steering money into China-linked securities, especially via the I fund. So is the results of this finding and some of this investigation just the trade-off of having a global economy? Is it really hard to invest internationally and not find links to Chinese companies? Or could we be more deliberate in some of these investments?
Oof, what a big topic. We should be more deliberate. The U.S. government, if it purports to be the manager of a fund, I think it is reasonable for individuals to believe that is done in a manner that allows them to have confidence in their assets. Do I think that it's reasonable that, with the exception of deciding that you don't want to participate in a fund, it is reasonable for every single one of our 350 million individuals to have a fund that is investing according to their particular values and mores? I don't know how that works. So it's a trade, right? And while I always believe that if you're participating with the U.S. government, you ought to have some assurance that the activities are conducted against a matrix of national interests that are articulated so that they can be scrutinized to make sure they comport with the values of the United States. Transparency that I'm generally in favor of. So if it's a government fund, you ought to be able to understand how it's being spent. Yeah, I think it is unreasonable to want the security of a government fund and to expect that every one of your values is met by that. Even as I believe that national values must always be discussed. And wouldn't it be nice if we had a Congress that allowed us to have conversations like that with the American people through our representative republic?
Sounds like a magical place.
I guess that's what I'm saying, right? I think that for us, the United States right now, what the American people said in many recent elections was the government isn't good enough for them. It isn't performing as well as it was. What it can't be is magical and doing what every single person needs without any authority and responsibility that the individual exerts. How do you strike that balance between those things which are governmental being adherent to a standard? I'm in favor of that. How do you have a conversation about what that standard is? That's why we have three branches of government. And then you have individuals that get to make a choice of, do you want the security of a governmental interest or do you want ultimate flexibility on your own personal interests? And that's what we're just trying to balance. And I think the conversation we had on Australia's program is it's trying to have features of both. I will say that conversation is as sure a way for us not to make progress, because if we can't make it perfect, we're not going to do it. And then we're going to have the system that doesn't provide you Social Security in the future, or people who invest privately to have enough of a foundation. Got to give something up.
Yeah, I think the fund managers could do a better job. I appreciate the returns, but I'd prefer not to be supporting and funding the shipbuilding holdings of China. And I think that's what it comes down to, right? You got to follow your own money, make your own personal investment decisions.
Right.
But you would naturally think that the government's retirement fund would not invest in strategic adversaries.
100%. Again, see soapbox number 1, as opposed to 3, 4, 5, and 6, it says, yeah, the government's got to be worthy. And if it is done in the name of the government, people have an expectation that it's done to standard. That's what transparency is about, and that's what oversight is about. And so I'm hoping that the same people that want that are having problems with what isn't being transparent now. But you and I see it the same, and we hold more responsibility on governmental things. But we have to find different systems and different approaches that scale.
Yep. What else are you watching?
Oh, goodness. There are just so many things going on right now. There are the farmers, and are we going to take the supposed money that we've taken on tariffs, even though I have no idea where that money is or how they're going to decide who it goes to, and whether we're going to bail out the farmers and whether that's the right thing to do. I don't have any good fix on what money we're talking about, what the source is. Is it going to come from? Do I know that it actually came into the nation? What are the other trades that we have? What's the long-term program? Are there other investments that we can make in order to do it? Is this a one-time payment? Haven't we made those before? Wasn't that done in the first administration? So there are a lot of things I don't like about it, although I will say agriculture is an element of U.S. security and strength. And it has been harmed, but I'm not sure that this one-time payoff fixes the underlying problems that we've talked about in previous episodes.
And do we expect that for next year, right? Because it is focused primarily on the row crops, soybeans and corn. And then I think the funding's supposed to come from the USDA's Commodity Credit Corporation, but where do they get backfilled from that $12 billion? And then, yeah, do farmers expect that again next year?
Let's see, what else are we watching? You and I have had an offline conversation about GenAI.mil, which I think it fits in today's theme, which I kind of like it. Google is a great example of something that was developed by DARPA against the security standards of the department that achieved scale by working within the government and then became the foundation for a technology that's put on the outside. If that's what GenAI.mil is going to do, then I say it's not a bad idea. On the other hand, back to the transparency thing, anything done for the government has got to have standards and traceability and assurance behind it. And I don't know that we have been wowed by that transparency that has come out of this department. Yay, unless. How about you?
I think it's great. I think get it out there, let people start using it. You get some training data and things that you can use on future models and iterate.
Yeah.
More is supposed to come, right? This is going to be controlled unclassified data. But one of the funny things, and it does not shock me in the slightest, that one of the first things that military members did, putting in a test prompt of a hypothetical commander, if we're to order a second missile strike on 2 survivors clinging to wreckage from an initial strike on a suspected drug boat, what would you do? Would that violate the UCMJ or the law of armed conflict? And the GenAI responded that the described actions would violate DOE policy and LOAC, calling the order to kill the survivors unambiguously illegal and something a service member would be required to disobey. So interesting and timely there.
Yeah. So again,
Hallucination.
I'm a big AI advocate because I don't think it replaces humans. Vision and accountability and limitations all come from humans. I think what this will help is the companies that are trying to offer their wares and their approaches to the military. It provides an environment where you could test it in some common sense without selling it to every single unit in the U.S. military. So I think there's a lot of good about it. But as with anything, we keep on thinking that investment in technology is going to solve the challenges we have, and it's not. It's the use and the outcomes that are really the differentiators that we underinvest in.
Yep. A couple other things I saw. The ACA extension vote failed in the Senate as expected. And then Chile's presidential election last week. It was won by the right-wing candidate, Jose Antonio Cast. He won with about 58% of the vote.
I guess the last thing I'm watching, and this is just a moment of personal privilege. Okay, I think public service is one of the areas of highest calling. And I expect leaders in public service to demonstrate the highest standards in terms of how it treats people. We've talked a lot about how people should think when they go to voting booths about what issues are important to them. I think how leadership is affected, not just what leadership affects, is something that when it is invoked in the name of public service has to be really attended to. It troubles me when public servants don't carry that responsibility of having a standard for how people are interacted with. And I think that's just one of the things that we can all insist on in our public service, not looking past that to say, yeah, but I like the thing they're doing. Too often at the end of the day, what you do and how you do it come together in either good or bad ways. So I'm watching that.
Choose kindness.
Choose kindness every day. It's always good, especially from someone who's in a leadership position.
All right. Well, that's what we're watching. Thank you for joining us, and no doubt there's more to come. This country's strength isn't in its power, industry, and government, but in its people.
As always, remember, we're here for you. Look for a link in the show notes to provide feedback or to suggest topics. We're always open, even if we don't always follow suggestions. Listen in next week to the Understandable Insights podcast, wherever you find it. And as always, go forth, do good, and for goodness sakes, be kind to one another. It makes a difference.